Now part of the Darkcast network. Welcome to Indie Podcasts with a dark side. On October 2nd, 2006, in Corpus Christi, Texas, 4-year-old Andrew Burd started vomiting after lunch. Hannah, his 29-year-old foster mother and a trained nurse, had just fed him a chili-like bean soup seasoned with Creole spices. Not long after eating, Andrew complained of a headache and said he felt cold. Then, he started throwing up. Instead of calling 911, Hannah believed she could get him help faster herself, so she and her husband Larry put Andrew in the car and headed to an urgent care clinic around 5 p.m. Hannah said, quote, "We were at a red light and I could see the urgent care place. Until that point, I had no idea it was life or death. I panicked." As they sat at that red light, Andrew stopped breathing. He was rushed into care and then transferred to a hospital in critical condition. Blood tests revealed he was suffering from extreme salt poisoning called hypernatremia. His sodium levels were nearly doubled the norm and was recorded as among the highest ever recorded. Then, on October 3rd, 2006, Andrew died. Within days, investigators began building a theory that this was not an accident. But that's not where this story even starts. Welcome, lambs. Welcome to Love and Murder, Heartbreak to Homicide. I'm your host, Kai, and in this podcast, I tell you cases of love that often turn to homicide. Now, today's case is a little bit different. This was actually going to be an after show, but after doing the research, I decided to do a full episode to call maximum attention to this story. Before we get back to the case, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're on. You could also just subscribe to the Patreon for free, patreon.com/loveandmurder. As a free lamb, you get reminders when an episode drops, plus you do get some bonuses that the public doesn't. Now, if you want even more, then join the Lamb Fam by choosing one of our paid tiers. You get extra cases like the after show, bonus episodes like Serial Killer Corner, and more, starting at only $3 a month and above. Patreon.com/loveandmurder. Now, hang with me while you're going about your day, perk up your ears, and let's get back to this case of love and murder. Hannah and Larry were high school sweethearts who dreamed of a large family. By 2006, they had 4 biological children, Isaac, Isabel, Alicia, and Sebastian, and Hannah was pregnant with their 5th child. The way I have one and I was like, oh, this is totally it for me. I already knew. Everybody was like, you're going to have more. Yeah, that hasn't happened. Andrew came into their lives through their church. His biological mother struggled with meth addiction, and he had been abused as an infant before spending 2 years in foster care. When the Overtons took him in for a 6-month trial period, they quickly realized his needs were severe. Hannah explained how he came into their lives in the first place. Quote, "Andrew was in a Sunday school class with our daughters, Isabel, and he was hoping every week for a forever family. But Andrew had special needs. He suffered from pica, an eating disorder where a person craves and eats non-food items. In Andrew's case, it wasn't mild either. He would eat soap, shampoo, paint chips, foam from his mattress, and items from the trash. His appetite was described as insatiable, and if he was denied food, he would have intense tantrums. His Sunday school teacher even tried to persuade the Overtons not to take him in, warning them about his significant developmental issues and urging them to think of the welfare of their other 4 children. There were also medical complexities. Andrew's foster care records showed he was never under the care of a single doctor for very long. That meant serious underlying conditions that could have made him more susceptible to salt intoxication were not fully understood at the time. Even with those challenges, Hannah described him saying, quote, "He was adorable, funny, cute, always wanted attention. He was so starved for love that he would gravitate towards anyone. He had a great little personality." On October 2nd, after he began vomiting and complaining of feeling cold, things escalated quickly. When Andrew arrived at the hospital, he was covered in bruises and scratches. Investigators immediately viewed this as a possible evidence of abuse. Within days of Andrew's death, authorities began theorizing that the salt poisoning was intentional. Hannah was brought in for questioning. During what was described as a grueling interrogation, she was, quote, totally naive and did not ask for a lawyer. She explained to Detective Michael Hess that Andrew had begged for more soup, and she had put a few dashes of Creole seasoning into a sippy cup of water. She hoped the flavor would satisfy him without overfilling his stomach. To Detective Hess, that explanation became what he called the smoking gun. Weeks after Andrew's death, Hannah and Larry were arrested during a high-profile traffic stop, complete with flashing lights and even TV cameras. So basically, the cops tipped off the press? Because Andrew was under the age of 6, the charge was capital murder, and in Texas, that means a mandatory minimum sentence of life without parole. Larry later said, quote, "We were just waiting for someone to look at it and say, this is just an accident. But instead, we were arrested." Arrest warrants soon described the Overton home as a house of horrors, alleging that Andrew was monitored by cameras and punished with spicy seasoning. Larry also said of the lead detective, quote, "I knew that he had his mind made up, that my wife had done something to Andrew." In January 2007, while out on bail awaiting trial, Hannah gave birth to their 5th child, Emma. She was allowed to stay with the newborn for only 3 days before CPS took the baby away. Their 4 biological children were briefly placed in separate foster homes before Hannah's mother was granted temporary custody. Hannah's trial started in September 2007 and lasted 3 weeks. The lead prosecutor, Sandra Eastwood, painted Hannah as a frazzled and enraged caregiver. She told the jury that the case, quote, boils down to a woman who basically tortured a child. Becoming so enraged, she forced him to have 23 teaspoons of hot pepper and then watched him die in agony. Andrew had an enraged mother who didn't, I don't think, loved him the way she loved her own biological children. Attorney Eastwood also argued that Hannah had forced Andrew to consume the equivalent of 6 teaspoons of salt. When it became clear that the jury might not fully believe intentional poisoning, the prosecution leaned heavily on, quote, murder by omission. Under this legal standard, the jury did not have to believe Hannah intentionally poisoned Andrew. They can convict her if they believed she failed to seek medical help fast enough, and that failure is what caused the death. Well, the defense told a very different story. They argued that Andrew's death was a tragic accident connected to his medical conditions. They pointed to the severe pica and the fact that Hannah had found him in the kitchen pantry early that day. They suggested he could have accidentally consumed a fatal amount of sodium on his own. Witnesses, including teacher and friends, testified about Andrew's bizarre eating habits and developmental delays. However, still, after 11 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict for capital murder. When polled afterwards, all 12 jurors said that they did not believe Hannah intentionally poisoned Andrew. They convicted her because they believed she did not get him to the hospital quickly enough. I mean, what would the difference have been? She would have sat there and just basically waited for the ambulance to come. So why not just take him to the hospital? Based on the evidence that's given so far, that was a dumb verdict, in my opinion. I guess if I was a juror on this case, they would have been so tired of me. Hannah was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Larry eventually pleaded no contest to criminally negligent homicide and received 5 years for probation and a $5,000 fine. As he reflected later, he said, quote, "There's not a day that I think about those things and wonder, could I have done something different?" Because it was a capital conviction, Hannah wasn't allowed to touch her children during visits. She could only see them through the glass partition. In prison, Hannah tried to hold on to whatever connections she had. She homeschooled her oldest son Isaac through correspondence, grading his work from her cell. Larry later reflected on what those years did to their family. Thinking about Hannah coming home one day, he said, quote, "The last time he hugged his mom, he was putting his arms around her waist. And when he hugs her this time, she'll be putting her arms around his waist." The emotional toll was severe. During her first few months behind bars, Hannah dropped 30 pounds because she was so depressed that she couldn't keep food down. She appealed after her sentencing, but in October 2009, it was denied by the 13th Court of Appeals in Texas, which affirmed the original ruling. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, cracks were beginning to show in the case. In 2010, Sandra Eastwood, the lead prosecutor in Hannah's trial, was terminated from the district attorney's office for unrelated reasons. In 2011, attorney Eastwood admitted that she struggled with alcohol dependency and diet pill use during her tenure as prosecutor. In February 2012, an evidentiary hearing was held. Medical experts and teachers testified about Andrew's pre-existing medical issues, including his pica and developmental delays. Dr. Edgar Cortez, a pediatrician, urged a broader look at the facts, saying, quote, "I think that if we're going to be fair, if we're going to be just, we have to take all of the circumstances into consideration." Ana Jimenez, who had served as co-counsel during his first trial, testified against Sandra's conduct. She said, quote, "Her entire behavior during the course of this trial was so far out. In my opinion, she's not thankful." She also believed attorney Eastwood was, quote, "not forthcoming with the evidence." Despite that testimony, in May 2012, District Judge Jose Longoria ruled that there was not sufficient evidence to grant a new trial. But the defense didn't give up and they kept pushing. Attorney Cynthia Orr took over the case and began digging into the original trial record. Attorney Orr later said, quote, "The presumption of innocence is something prosecutors should hold dear because that is what the entire system of justice hinges on." With that in mind, her team uncovered several critical issues. First, withheld evidence. During the original trial, prosecutors had claimed that samples of Andrew's vomit were unavailable for testing. However, during the appeals process, those samples were located and tested. The results showed low sodium levels. That finding strongly suggested that the lethal dose of salt was not forced into Andrew immediately before he became sick, contradicting the prosecution's theory. Second, missing testimony. Dr. Michael Moritz, so there's a salt poisoning expert? How many experts are there out there in, I guess, the world of the court? So anyway, Dr. Michael Moritz had recorded a video stating that it takes at least an hour for symptoms of salt poisoning to appear. That timeline would have supported the Overton's claim that they reacted appropriately once Andrew began showing serious symptoms. Third, ineffective counsel. Hannah's original defense team had failed to call medical experts who could have explained Andrew's medical issues, including how hypernatremia and pica could complicate the picture, for instance, causing bruising. So remember when his mom brought him to the hospital and he had a lot of bruising? Well, now they're finding out that hypernatremia and pica could cause this bruising. Ana Jimenez, co-counsel during the first trial, testified about attorney Eastwood's conduct. Quote, "Her entire behavior during the course of this trial was so far out. In my opinion, she is not truthful." Dr. Edgar Cortez, a pediatrician who testified during the appeal, said, quote, "I think that if we're going to be fair, if we're going to be just, we have to take all the circumstances into consideration." Even Dr. Alexandra Rhoda, who had testified for the prosecution during the original trial, later expressed regret. He said, quote, "The outcome of this case still keeps me up at night after 7 years." In a later letter supporting Hannah's release, he wrote that at worst, the original conviction should have been child endangerment, not murder. On September 17th, 2014, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned Hannah's conviction in a 7-2 ruling, citing ineffective counsel during her original trial. So basically, she's free to go. When Hannah heard the news, her first reaction was disbelief. She asked, quote, Is this real? Does this say what I think it says? Well, yep. On December 16, 2014, she was released from jail on a $50,000 bond. For the first time in 7 years, she was home with her family. Then, in April 2015, the murder charges were officially dismissed. In May 2017, District Attorney Mark Gonzalez went a step further and officially declared Hannah innocent. That declaration of outright innocence protected her from ever being tried again for the same crime. This ended what had been described as years of legal limbo and securing double jeopardy protection. It also made her eligible for state compensation. Under Texas law, she was entitled to $80,000 for each year of wrongful imprisonment. On March 8, 2018, it was announced that Hannah would receive $573,333.33 in restitution for the 7 years she spent behind bars. I mean, this actually means absolutely nothing for the years she spent away from her children. Her then newborn is now 7. She missed her first steps, her first words, the baby smell, that new baby smell. She missed watching her grow and change into the person that she basically is now. Money does make your life easier, but you know what it doesn't do? Replace important aspects of your life. When asked about the compensation, she said, quote, I'm very thankful that this compensation is finally coming through. However, no amount of money will ever bring back the years that were taken away. She also spoke openly about forgiveness. Regarding Eastwood, she said, quote, I don't know what her limitations are, but her motive was behind it. And I've chosen to forgive her because I can't hold on to that bitterness. She added, quote, every day I hear about things that I missed out on with my family, and that hurts. But I don't deal with anger that often. The family eventually welcomed their 6th child in December 2017, and now the Overtons have a round even figure with 6 children. But today, Hannah and Larry run a nonprofit that supports incarcerated women. The organization grew out of the years they spent navigating the prison system, courtrooms, and the loss of time with their children. The case left behind hard-hitting questions about investigative tunnel vision, the use of, quote, murder by omission, and the responsibility prosecutors have when handling complex medical evidence. Larry once said about the early stages of the investigations, quote, we were just waiting for someone to look at it and said, this is just an accident. Instead, it became a capital murder conviction. Then, 7 years later, it became an exoneration. And for Hannah, the legal ending came in May 2017, but the personal impact on October 2nd, 2026 will always be a part of her story. What do you think about this case? Normally, I'm raging about the defense. If you're returning lamb, you know this. But in this case, I was on their side. I mean, what was the prosecution doing? What were they thinking? I know that she's not dealing with this with anger, which actually is the way that you should be dealing with your hardships, with patience and not anger. For me, that would be hard with this situation, and I would have to work really hard at putting my anger aside. So let me hear what's going on in your head right now. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And as we end each episode, I want to remind you that it's, say it with me now, all love and no murder, y'all.